Wonderful. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining this first Trimaris I Did a Thing Arts and Sciences webinar. Today we'll discuss one approach to medieval research and how to present arts and sciences documentation and written works. There are many ways to approach research, and Mistress Ambra will simply share what has worked for her, how it has impacted her craft, and some resources you can use in your own pursuits. Her focus will be on research as it applies to the SCA Arts and Sciences, entries and presentation, and you'll have time at the end for questions. Welcome, and without any further ado, I'm going to take it away to Mistress Ambra. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you again, and thank you so very much for administrating this. This is absolutely a wonderful idea. I love this evolution of the I Did a Thing. This is completely perfect. So, as she referenced, I am Mistress Ambra Michelli of the Kingdom of Trimaris, and I have been in the SCA since the womb. And I started off, honestly, my first love of arts came with bardic arts, performance and that sort of thing. Honestly, because as a child, my father said I could stay up as late as I wanted so long as I stayed by the fireside. And so I got to, stay up past my bedtime, and this was the most exciting thing for a child. And then just over the years that evolved, and I took a liking to it. I had a moderate talent with my voice, and I eventually began writing very poorly. And then eventually got some really great help from wonderful artisans. That's what the SCA is all about, is just this free open source knowledge that you can absorb like a sponge. And you don't have to feel pressured to do it. But so, it evolved over time. And I got to a point where I was very well recognized for my art. And, as somebody who grew up in the SCA looking, for their career or what path they want to take or what have you, I wondered, I'm known for my art. I feel like I'm doing a really good job here, and so I asked a couple of laurels. I'm like, hey, what's the next step? At the time I was like, how do I become a laurel? And, I was told, you have a beautiful voice. We love hearing you sing. Thank you for the gift of your time and your talent. But if you ever want to be a laurel, then you have to prove that at least some element of your craft is authentic. And I will tell you that as somebody who was a bard who spent my time hitting the event site, singing all night, waking up, either fighting or sitting by the field or hanging out and singing, and then waiting for the bardic to start, that was my obsession. I had no desire to do homework and, do a bunch of research. I felt like people like my stuff now, so why should I do this other thing? It's like the difference between somebody who, goes into the trade and learns the skills of the trade, as opposed to, and maybe does some trade schooling, but doesn't, go that pure academic path and get like a bachelor's or a master's or what have you degree. And I was just like, is that really necessary? And I tried my hand at it. And the first time I did it, I'll tell you point blank, I got a 32. I did not do well. And I came away, I didn't expect 100, but I didn't expect a 32. I was used to the little gold star, and it hurt my little feelings that I did not get a gold star. And so naturally I dug into, well, how do I get the gold star? Well, I entered a couple of different formats, some studio arts, mostly, I wanted to dig into writing. So I started with English and Scottish balladry, and eventually evolved to poetry, which I ended up, in this process, I ended up liking a lot more, because with the poetry, I found, and we'll get into the sources of inspiration and that sort of thing. I found I had a finite set of rules that I had to work within. So it gave me structure, because ever before, I'm a wordy person. If you've ever met me, I very much enjoy the English language and using all of the words. And so my messages, my songs were not necessarily concise. I created these grand ballads that certainly entertained us around the fire, but it didn't necessarily communicate what I wanted to communicate. So along that songwriting journey, I found that poetry actually helped to rewire my brain a little bit more. I really dug into sonnets, Italian and English in particular, late 17th century, and yeah, in 16th century. And I really loved it because there were 15 lines. They had a set accountable, amount of syllables I had to put in each line. I had to beware of my, putting the right emphasis on the right syllable, so it really helped me change the way I looked at my own songwriting. because one of the challenges I ran into was when I would write a song, I would write what I felt. And certainly the word at the end of the line would rhyme and the line itself would be beautiful, or I would think it was beautiful, but there wasn't a structured meter, not as clean as it would be. You know, I would force a bunch of syllables into the line just to say what I wanted to say, but not really dig into the elegance of how I wanted to say it. So long story shorter, learning the history, the foundations of the structure and the authenticity of medieval poetry really helped me dig into what really applied to allowing my songs to evolve to a point where somebody else who hadn't maybe heard it could actually pick up a sheet of paper and at the very least read it without stumbling over everything and, you know, things not lining up and wondering how it went. You know, you can come up with a random tune and just sing it, which allows the work to travel beyond me. And as a bard, specifically as a writer, if 100 years from now, no one knows my name, but is singing some element of my song around the fire, that's immortality, that's glory, right? And so that's really what sort of gave me some positive reinforcement with some of these lower scores that I was getting to continue that. And I did continue to struggle as I approached that until one day someone, and I'll tell you, we didn't even get on the best, but she said, oh dear honey child, I see you struggling. Come with me. And she didn't lecture me. She didn't, you know, make me dress me down or talk at me a bunch. So I was overwhelmed and I couldn't absorb the information. What she did was she said, just shadow me, just come with me and we're going to judge a written works and we're going to do it together. And I said, okay, fine. So we sat down together and we were looking at this piece of paper and she showed me the paper. She judged it. So it wasn't like somebody who'd never judged anything before was, you know, trying to give this person who worked a year on their art, you know, this is how I think you should do it. But it was a very helpful sort of layout. And so what I also found was there was another gentleman who I hadn't had much exposure to, but I'd always admired for his art. He sat down next to me too. And something that really dug into why I think this process, this arts and science research and development is important, along the various different things you have to touch on in your structure. And again, we're going to dig into this. They talk about tools, right? One of the sections was, you know, are your tools, you know, authentic? You know, were the tools that you used appropriate for the art that you're creating? And, you know, you get different points for how much that is true, or rather how much you have proven that that is true. And so I had always structured my paperwork to define the tools of a poet, right? So I said, you know, a quill, ink. I had like a little piece of lapis out there that you could shave down to make the ink. I had like bits of parchment and vellum and a pretty little writer's desk. These are the tools of my trade. And the gentleman beside me said, okay, that's lovely and that's not inappropriate. But what about the other tools of a poet, like metaphor or syntax? Context, internal rhyme, alliteration, right? And I was just like, okay, all right, I get you, all right. And what that helped me do was really break down the structure of my poetry to show not only was the subject matter that I was writing about, period, or authentic at least in concept, but the way I was doing it was the way that they would have done it, you know? And the only way that I could argue that was the case was just like on a math test. I can tell you 2 + 2 is 4, but I had to show my math, right? And that's how we all know that 2 + 2 is truly 4. You know, as much as we assume, of course, 2 + 2 is 4, I have proved it, right? And so I can stand strong by my understanding of the authenticity of my work. And or not, I can choose to defy that rule and say I wrote it this way because I like it better this way. They wouldn't have done that, but at least I'm coming from a point of education, i.e. this is sci-fi Sam versus authentic Ambra. And sometimes the two collide. But anyway, so we're going to dig into this, but just going through that process and digging into that quote unquote homework really helped change the way I looked at my structure. It also cleaned up a lot of things. So for instance, I know I've been through high school. I know what metaphor is, right? And so, and a simile, or, you know, I've added all sorts of different beautiful concepts and visuals in my music, but I would be all over the place. I'd talk about, the embers of a fire or the branches of a tree or the bird flying across the sky. But there was no consistency and there wasn't repetition. So I didn't take that idea, that visual, and evolve it throughout the song. And so these are things that as a deeper songwriter, like you just really geek out about. And I wouldn't have thought to really dig in that way if I had not gone through this process. So I am going to show you an example of how I structure my research, because remember, started with a 32 and I consistently, and not every time, but get into the high 90s. I've gotten a couple of 100s, I've gotten some 89s, but regardless, this format is a good foundational structure that you can apply if you want. Again, there are many ways to skin this cat. If nothing else, it's worth trying. And then the key thing is really when you get your feedback sheets, you really want to dig in to review that feedback and see where you can plug the holes in your boat, right? And you may not think it's stinking, but if they think it's stinking and they're the one who's going to grade you, then at the very least, we can talk to why it's not sinking in the future one, right? So it can be a little bit of a downer when you don't get the gold star. But again, it's not about the gold star. It's about what type of artist do you want to be 10 years from now, right? Because you can keep doing what you're doing and you'll be an amazing artist. But following or digging into the art side, documentation, authenticity path, you can be an amazing scholar and help elevate that level as well. And so the work that you're going to come out, that you're going to produce, at the very least, is going to feel more medieval. And why play an medieval game if we don't want to at least pretend that we are, in a medieval environment? So again, it's not something you have to do, but it is definitely something that helped me as an artist. And that was my priority in the beginning. So, okay, so as you can see on your screen, I have brought you to the Kingdom website, literally trimaris.org. All right, so if you need this, I have put the link in the I Did a Thing layout event on the Facebook page, but it's also accessible right here. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get there. And then I've also just put the link in there, so in the Facebook chat, so in case you want it. And then you can always ping me, Samantha Moore on Facebook. Feel free to just ping me and I can always shoot it to you too. But this is how you get to the art side resources, which I find very useful. So here we are on the home page. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go to Our People. All right. Then you're going to go to Greater Kingdom Officer of Trimaris. All right. Then you're going to go to Office of the Minister of Arts and Sciences. And here you're going to find awesome different, options here. You can figure out who the deputies are. The deputies can report. We can talk about our kingdom and regional art side fairs. Okay. We're going to go to the how to enter option because that's going to be where our information is. But I'm going to start you off here. So if we go to Kingdom Regional Arts and Science Fairs, then it's going to take you here. All right. And it's going to talk about like the different types of things that you can enter. If you want to register your project, which is really good to give the KMOES a heads up you're coming, just because you need table space. And it talks about the regional fairs and that sort of thing. So this gives you some basic information. But then what we're going to do is we're just going to go to how to enter. Again, it's accessible via the dropdown, but it's also accessible here. Learn how to enter your project into Kingdom Regional Arts and Science Fairs. This is a page to dog ear. All right, so this is really going to be your go-to. So here you have the rules and pre-registration for the event. So if you're ever wondering what the rules are, you don't have to just reinvent the wheel and say, I did a pretty, how, is this good enough? Like this gives you some structure and some guidelines. This, I'm going to go ahead and open this real quick. This is divisions and categories, okay? This breaks down all the different divisions and categories that you can enter in. And mind you, it is not limited to this. If you have a weird creature you really want to dig into, like we will shoehorn it into one of these categories and figure out which, judging sheet assessment form sort of works best. And or the KMOES can actually create a new division. It's happened before. So, it talks about performance. And as you can see, there's all sorts of different options here. There's textile and needle arts. Again, all your various different concepts. Costume, breaks it down by time period so that ideally you'll have people who are familiar with later period garb judging you as opposed to people who are more familiar with earlier period garb. Doesn't always work out that way, but it does, at least give you a good faith effort of, anybody want this? I do. And then, armor, if you want technological sciences, this includes making instruments or metal work. I've got a apprentice who does, chasing, studio arts, which is very beautiful, all your glass work, all sorts of stuff broken down here, fine arts, calligraphy and illumination, jewelry, etc. Domestic arts, all sorts of stuff. You want to do stuff with goats, like there's an authentic, appropriate way to do that. So, this is where you want to go. Beverages, food preparation. Oh, where would a bar be without, noms and good mead? Games and toys, herb craft, etc. I'm not, I know you all can read, but written works, this is my favorite. Obviously this is my favorite place. Poetry, research paper, and it speaks about the actual research paper, prose, and then society arts, you could do heraldic displays, persona displays, all sorts of wonderful stuff. So I'm not going to belabor this too much. Feel free to go here. This is a great resource in case you're just wondering, what would I even enter? So coming back here, judging forms. This is important. If you are going to enter into an art sci and you think you have completed your program, your project, the number one thing I would suggest you do is download one of the judging forms and say, okay, this is the judging form they're going to use to grade me. How would I grade myself? Give it to a friend and have them grade it and say, is it where I think it is going to be, as opposed to showing up and not doing that and then being surprised by whatever it is that you get. Because while that is still very beneficial, it hurts my little Barty feelings. So I like to try to do all the preparation I possibly can. I'll do my very best and be proud of everything I could have possibly done. And then I can take a deep breath and absorb the feedback a lot more without hyper fixating on the number. But we're really going to dig into, here are a couple of different how-tos. There's not just mine that we're going to talk about today, but there's also, this one, which is an example of novice static presentation. It's a PDF. There's getting started, which, also talks about, the breakdown of the hall and that sort of thing. And then this speaks to different honorifics, different awards you can win, or recognitions that you'll get. And then these are some really great aids that I would really forgive me, encourage you to use. EasyBib.com is a citation creation. I got to tell you, I got a bachelor's degree in graphic design. Okay, I was in honors English, but if I had to do it blind right now, I could not give you a citation that was correctly formed. I would get red marks on my paper. Okay, I use EasyBib. This wonderful tool literally allows you to go in and answer the questions that I'm not going to break it down too much, but it literally, you can create one. So is it a book? Is it a journal? Is it a website? You literally type it in and then it's going to give you more information. But as you answer the questions in the little 5-question book, it's going to literally create the link for you. And then you can copy that and put it in your bibliography and poof, you have a citation that is correctly written. And that, in the end, if you had just typed out the web address or the book address and just given a bunch of information, that's enough to absorb. Like nobody should be really digging into, oh, do you have the appropriate, semicolon behind this or what have you. But I will tell you, for the academic minds who really dig into scholarship, you make them do a little happy dance. They'll just be really happy, and so it doesn't hurt and it's really easy to do. And then Grammarly is like one of my favorite things. You do have to be careful, but it has a plagiarism checker. So if you are getting a lot of online resources from, great sources, you do want to be careful that you're paraphrasing, that you're using your own words, that you are, communicating the information in a way that you understand it and not just copy and paste it, unless you've got it in quotation marks, legitimately doing that. And so the plagiarizer checker will say, all right, how much of this is me and how much of this is I need to work on this still. And so that's really good and really important, because we don't want to take credit for somebody else's work, because that, what is it, stolen valor? Like we don't want to go there, right? We want to communicate what we've learned and give credit where credit is due. And then that's how this, evolves. And we're not just regurgitating information, we're sharing, evolving knowledge. And there are a couple of great, sources here as well, for if you're looking for actual information. And then Society for Creative Anachronism literally has a bunch of suggested research links, so feel free to go there. There's also Facebook references for like SCA, askalaurel.com or something like that. If you literally type in SCA laurels or something like that, or arts and sciences in the SCA, like a bunch of things will pop up. It's always okay to go out there and just say, hey, I'm trying to learn to do this. Can everybody point me in the right direction? And sometimes you'll get a hit, and sometimes it'll be crickets. But there's more than one Facebook site, so don't let one blocker like make you feel like you're stuck. So we talked about pre-registration rules, divisions and categories, downloading the documentation form. For novice, there's an actual form. You literally just fill it out and you say, it asks you a couple questions like what region, time period, etc. What tools did you use, what have you. You literally just have to answer the questions. This is how you dip your toe in the pond of arts and sciences, and you're going to get some really great information here. And then download the novice assessment form because, again, grade yourself before you hand it into the teacher. And then for journeyman and masterwork, they don't have hey, just fill out this form. And so this is where my layout here, which is where we're going to dig into now, really comes into play. But they do have the assessment form, so you literally just click on this and then you select the type that you want. It'll be broken down by category for the most part. And then you can grade yourself. So I belabor this point, but it's important, people. And then, of course, once you've done all of that, then you can register. All right. So that's how you get to that information, just on our Kingdom website. Now, from our Kingdom website, we're going to click right here, a practical how-to on entering arts and sciences. This is just something I put together. This is not how Trimaris does it. I have seen people literally do it with trifold boards and pictures and stuff like that. So long as you're answering the information and giving the sources necessary and truly speaking to the authenticity of the work or answering the questions to the degree necessary to grade you full points, people are going to do that. So they're going to give you all the points. They want to give you all the points. So just be mindful. So we're going to come to this. Where are we? Okay, we're going to just open my thing because I thought I had it open. Right. And yes.
Charlotte has a question.
Yes.
Actually, I have a really good question from the chat, and it's great, Christian, because I had the same question. Mistress Ambra, what is the preferred citation method? Is it MLA, Chicago, or APA? Does it matter? What is typically preferred?
So for Trimaris, anybody who tells you that there's an actual one, there's not. There's no rule or regulation saying that you're going to do that. I have heard MLS is preferred. I have been told that many times, but there's no one who will count you down for using Chicago or anything else. And even if you don't use that format, it's not required. There is not a you need to be at this academic level and present your information at this academic level to receive 100% on your work. It should be structured in a way that communicates the information that can be read and absorbed, but how you lay it out is truly up to you. I have literally seen a master level project that was literally just a model of like this beautiful, oh my God, it's done so well. This beautiful like Roman village, right? And it had information like in these like little tabs, just like you'd see at a museum, right? And it had the little source written under it, but literally was a link and or a reference to a book that was present or referenced or what have you. And so there was information supporting it, but literally was all visual. So long as the answers can be questioned, the questions can be answered, then there's nothing wrong with that. So like I said, a lot of people who come from the academic background, they'll tell you MLS. But if anybody is scoring you down because you chose Chicago over MLS, go to the KMOS immediately so that the judge can be re-educated, because that's not appropriate.
And just for the record, I will be using APA for life.
As you wish, as you will. And that may very well be evolved to be what it is now. I can only tell you what it was when I was getting critique on that. Now I use EasyBib, so it puts it in the way that I want it. And so, like I said, more power to those who want to do it, because again, if you're trying to publish academically, that could definitely benefit you, right? But that's not the focus of what I want to do with my research and what I'm doing. And that is why I say there is more than one way to skin a cat. You can do all of that. And I know there's a lot of cat lovers here, so I don't mean that, legitimately, but just whatever works to communicate the information and prove your source. Show your math, right? Make sure that there's an example. And I've seen people with tabs and books literally see this book and the yellow tab, and that has been the source, right? And highlighted. And again, that's a little more work. I wouldn't go that way, but you can, so. Okay, so Trimaris Arts and Sciences, a formula for success. So again, we talked a lot about, why we would enter art sci, right? One example I gave earlier, that carving rules on a jewelry box may be really cool, but how much cooler would it be to know that what you're carving actually communicates what you are? Some scripts weren't meant for actual word, concept, and I know a teacher right now sort of twitching her brain to like, don't use the words, but so the more educated you are, the cooler like level that box is. So like I would love to get a jewelry box that just has like Norse runes over it, and it just looks cool, and maybe it says my name in Norse runes, or it doesn't, it just has random runes on it. It's just like aesthetic, and that's beautiful. But also, if you're doing it for a ceremony or something like that, and it literally communicates something of import, I mean, it's level up. So that's one reason why we might dig in. So there's all sorts of different examples, but I've already shared with you mine, right? I wanted to be a better writer, and this was definitely something that assisted me. Feedback can be tough, okay? So as a bard, I got immediate feedback, right? I either sang a song and people liked it and they clapped, or I sang a song and people, maybe clapped a little, and it did not go so well. With this information, you're getting 2 or 3 pieces of paper back, from 2 or 3 people, saying, hey, I think you should do this. And sometimes the information is even conflicting. Hey, I think you sing too high, or hey, I think you should sing higher. And this can be really frustrating because like, what do you want? One of the things I would beware the most of is, casting the judges in one lance. A lot of people will say, oh, the laurels this or the laurels that. Laurels are made up by, I would say, 50 to 70 active people in the kingdom right now. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on whether or not COVID hit us. You can't categorize all of us as the laurels, right? So the laurels don't want it to be one way or another. The 3 judges who judged you that day may or may not have even been a laurel. And what quote unquote do they want? They want to be able to give you full points. And if they feel like they can't, they're going to tell you why. And so you're going to answer and speak to that. You're going to fill that in, but it's hard, right? It's just like if you're going on the battlefield, right? And one knight says, hey, you really need to fight left foot forward. And the other knight says, nah, you need to fight right foot forward. I suggest you try both ways, see what works for you, and then just be prepared, to engage people of the opposite foot, depending on the scenario, and speak to that. I know you would rather I fight, sword leg forward because it'll give me that extra reach, but I'm not going to do that because I don't like being hit and I'm not fast enough. So I'm going to go sword leg forward, but I am going to be mindful of that distance difference between you and me now that I understand it. So these are things that evolve in your own layout. Just feedback sucks sometimes, but you need to get through the emotion of they said I didn't do perfectly to the information they provided is meant to help me. And if it's not meant to help you and it's a little harsh, again, engage your KMOEF because there's an opportunity for re-education. Okay, note, this is the biggest thing. You are not a number. Whether you get a 32 or a 100 does not speak to the quality of your art or you as an artisan, okay? So I have gone to kingdoms and sung songs in competitions that I have gotten 2nd or 3rd place for because the song was dead before I even showed up. They're like, we hear that too often, you should learn something else. But I'm like, I will take that, So being 2nd or 3rd, I'm not a number. I had a song travel beyond me. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm 100,000% right now. So when you get your score back, know that the great macro summarization of your year's worth of effort is not 2 digits or 3 digits on a piece of paper, right? Dig into the information, dig into what they're telling you. And because even if it's not valid, you can speak to that in your paperwork. You can say, they said, oh, well, you should use this. That's an opportunity for you to educate that particular judge. And you're like, well, I'm the entrant. Why should I be educating other people? Oh, well, that's the whole purpose of the art side documentation portion, is so that this information can be shared and evolve beyond you, so that if aliens abduct you tomorrow, or you fly off to Valhalla for whatever reason, like your art can live, your knowledge, perpetuates beyond you. It's so important because otherwise, good for you, you got 100, nobody remembers that project you did 4 years ago. But if people can dig in and learn from the information you're providing, they get to apply it to their own work. That's how the whole understanding of your art evolves. And you become a better artist because you have other people who challenge you, or at least are understanding of what it is that inspires you. And maybe you find another person you can geek out with because they are now also educated in that. And, or, again, your feedback comes back and you're like, oh, I need to switch this. The whole concept of, this couplet at the end is supposed to be backwards from what I understood it. So thank God. It's like mispronouncing a word constantly in your conversation. Please God, somebody tell me I'm saying it wrong. So don't get fixated on the number because the number's going to change. You're going to go from 32 to 90s and it's going to be amazing. And it doesn't happen to happen tomorrow, right? Because it doesn't matter how many hundreds that you make in the art side, that's not going to make you a laurel either. Right? There's no one thing, being a laurel is not, oh, I've achieved some, quantifiable goal. There's a lot more to it than that. You have to administrate and lead, and being a laurel shouldn't even be the only reason why you dig into art side, because again, it's to become a better, more well-informed artist. So I again, verbose, but onward. So show your work. Again, this is just our concept of, I say it's authentic. They would have worn shoes in the Middle Ages. So obviously the shoe that I'm making is period. I'm like, okay. And I hear you and I see the logic. Yeah, I want to wear shoes too, but how do I know the shoe that you've made is what they would have had? Show me an extant version. Oh, well, they don't have an extant version of this particular shoe. I'm like, well, you got to work with me. Like, I believe you believe what you're saying. How can I, and I have faith in you as an artist and a person, and I appreciate you, but prove to me, that 2 + 2 is 4. And how are you going to do that? And we're going to speak to that, of course. But showing your work, this is what we do in the documentation. Basically, we're just going to say, I made this thing. I think it's authentic. Here's my argument as to why, right? And then basically, rah, rah, art science is nothing if not, you've got this. Good job. Like, don't feel beaten down. It's just, again, I parallel, because I do fight, I parallel a lot of things in the field. And I have only ever one attorney. I have fought in many, not as many as I should, but it's not about the end product, right? It's you are as good as you are tomorrow, right? Yesterday, we learned from yesterday, but that doesn't define us, right? We're not defined by only what we have accomplished. We get to push ourselves to what we aspire. So like you didn't get a great score, cry, scream, have a drink, take a deep breath. I have the best dear friend who really helped me in my late 20s or so with my songwriting. It's all over the place. I would send her my work and literally I would get it back in the mail and there would be so much red ink over the paper. It would look like it was bleeding. And I was just like, I might be able to keep like a line or two. And it was heartbreaking looking. I'm like, but I sent you my child and it has come back destroyed. And it really hurt. But once I was able to take a deep breath, and sometimes it does take several months to pick up that piece of paper again. And look at what she was saying. It was never like, oh, you suck, or you did a horrible job, or just give up. This is ridiculous. It was, you are saying the tree is tall. What you want to say is the great tree grows. And that's not what you're saying, because I know that's what you want to say, but you're not communicating that. And so it really helped bring my brain around. You can't give up. When you're frustrated because the feedback comes back and it hits you sideways, and I'll never be good enough. Certainly, if you don't do more, you won't grow from where you are now. But there is no quote unquote good enough. There's no Laurel today who says, you know what, I'm so awesome, I could never approve at all. I am just perfect, and there's nothing I could learn, right? So, why would they continue the art if that was the case? There would be no drive, no inspiration. So don't be sad for too long. So I want to tell everyone this in case they didn't know. Second life theory, okay? Anytime you create a project, master level, journeyman level, frickin' no novice level, there's something called, I like to call it second life theory, but really it could be more than second life. If I go and I enter a piece and I get a 32 or something, I can take all of that feedback, apply like only even 50% of that feedback, but I can apply at least 50% of that feedback, and I can enter that same project over again. Maybe I'll make tweaks to it. Maybe the project itself was perfect, but the presentation of my documentation either didn't communicate what it needed to communicate, or I was just missing stuff. I had holes in the information I was communicating. I can enter that same project. I don't have to spend another year doing a sheep to shear project, new, hoping that the feedback I'm going to apply from the last project is going to apply to this project. Like, I can enter the same thing over and over again until I get a better job. Now, obviously, if I'm not applying anything and I'm just re-entering, that's, wasting a bunch of people's time. So you do want to apply the feedback. But, just because you get a 32 doesn't mean that project is dead. Doesn't mean that project wasn't worth doing. So just keep that in mind, because that was really heartening for me to understand. And then past arts and science champions and more. In case you wanted to know, there is a list of past arts and science champions and their honorific site. There's a link here, but you can also go to it from the website. It's cool to see, who your current champions are for what thing. So you do get recognized, so that's fantastic. But again, that recognition, because it's, a list on a website somewhere, that's very tribal. So, everything you do to this point matters. But, we don't get to quote unquote sit on our laurels. We want to keep doing new things. And that doesn't mean we have to keep entering ArtSci over and over and over again, though I encourage you to, because it's great for those who have finally figured it out, to give examples of, hey guys, this is how you should do it if you want to score well, like here are examples. But also, in case there's anybody on this who hasn't heard my many, many calls for it, if you have an ArtSci project that has done well in a category, please, by God, send me a PDF of it. And we literally will put it on the Kingdom website to put it underneath where that categories are. There's already a couple up there. So that somebody who is brand new to the game says, how do I enter a journeyman level, studio arts, glass, stuff? Oh, look, here's a picture of somebody who scored, decently in, at that level, in this thing. And maybe I will structure my information accordingly. I'm like, oh, tools. I should consider the tools of the poet as opposed to just the tools of the person who was writing the poetry. Oh, good idea. See, it will just help, everything you put in the punch bowl, it all mixes around, and that's what you can put out. So if you stop putting stuff in, you can't take as much stuff out. So just keep that in mind. Documentation. All right. So when you lay out, now we're going to talk about laying out your project. Okay. This is the example that I wanted to talk. That was all cursory, hey, BT dubs, keep this in mind. Chin up, soldier. We got this. But now we're going to talk about the structure. All right. So here's what a layout that you have. So you want to put your ID number. This mattered a lot a while ago. It doesn't matter as much anymore. I still use it, but basically it's the first and second initial of your name, like SM for me, and it would be like your birth date or whatever number is going to be consistent that you're going to use all the time. I've had people not want to use their birth date because they're like, it is not your business how old I am. Okay, I am perpetually 27, and that's where we're going to leave it. But you can put whatever it is, so long as it's a unique ID. And the concept is that theoretically you would just have that documented somewhere so that over time KMOESs can look and answer the Laurel Circle, for instance, if they have questions about an artisan, to say, hey, what did this person get? Because we can look you up by name, but some people change their name. I mean, I've had 4 names in the society over the time, but my ID number does not change. So the category and division, the title of the entry, that can literally, I made a shoe, like, it doesn't matter. Country or region, the item is from, right, in period. So, 17th century Shakespearean sonnets, 16th century sonnets, or what have you. Time period of the item within 50 years, right? They're saying, oh, okay, around the 1358, this madrigal was written by Francisco Landini. Intended setting of the item, right? On a poet's table, in a merchant shop, on the field, whatever it is. This gives people a context. So this is the main layout that I use for my work. Literally, it's 8 pages, right? Now, my work ends up being a lot more than that. But these are the different sections, right? Inspiration, all right? So this doesn't speak to, hey, I saw a young boy hand a sword to a knight on a field, and so that inspired me to make a sword. That's not really what we're looking for. The inspiration is, I saw this example of an authentic extant, sword, and so I wanted to recreate this weapon, right? That's what we're looking for. What is the extant example that you're using? And sometimes you don't have extant examples, all right? And there's a complexity there we'll try to get into. But ideally, you'll have at least one source. I like to call it the rule of 3. If you have 3 extant sources, then there's not the best argument saying that if I create something that is similar to this, that I'm failing to create an authentic project, as far as its source is concerned, as far as what it is. You don't always have 3, and you have to be mindful because, if you have the actual item, then that's an extant piece, right? If you just have like a painting of the item, then as we know today, if I were to make a caricature of you today, it would not necessarily be the same, or I might make your hair a little more curly or give you some earrings that you didn't have or what have you, right? So that's not really viable. It doesn't hurt. It does count as a secondary source, so it can be supportive, but you do really want to try to hunt for this thing actually existed, right? And so that's what I'm creating. Style and creativity, we're going to talk to that. Materials and ingredients, tools and equipments, we're going to talk about how these differ. Analysis, this is your own take. Hey, this is what I learned from this project. This is what I understand. This is information I think is important to you. This is me proving my math that what I've done is, authentic. The bibliography, which is basically a compilation of all of your sources, ideally in the order that they are referenced, but at the very least, the numbers need to like match up, because sometimes I'm like, I'll move stuff around. And so, I'll have if I don't have enough time, if I'm rushing, then sometimes my 2s will be before my 10s. But regardless, as long as they link up so I can truly connect them, I'm like, okay, good. This is great. Now, some people will tell you to put, and we'll get into this more, to put, if you have the books and or the full articles, to have them present. That takes up a lot of table space. A lot of people tell you that it's not needed. Some people tell you that it is needed. I use them because I'm never going to have somebody tell me that it was needed and me not have it. But it is not required. So ideally, it would pass fact check. Like if I had my phone and I went to the link you went to, it should take me to where I need to go. But that you don't have to spend $70 at the print shop, printing off 12 articles that are 150 pages each. So some people will argue that, but if they do, I'd love to partner with them in that conversation. So appendixes with additional relevant research information. Okay, so there's sometimes you just have to communicate information that is outside the scope of the concise judging information, right? So like, I'm going to be judged on these things. They're going to answer these questions. This is what I really need the judges who only have an hour to look at my stuff to really dig into. But there's also this really cool information that I think is really relative to my research and what really helped me develop my final product, and it's important. So I'm going to add it here. So just be mindful that you can geek out as much as you want. You don't want to belabor the meat of your project to the point where the judges can't absorb it enough to be able to give you the score that you deserve. But you can still add the information. So there is a place for it in this structure. Again, this is just one structure. This is what's worked for me. So in this instance, it literally, when I have a student who's looking to enter ArtSci, I literally give them a Word document with 1 through 8. And I'll have, these 8 pages in a Word document. And then I just say, add stuff underneath these. So on page 1, like create a break page and then fill in the inspiration information. Go to style and creativity, break page, create all that information. So we're talking about sources of inspiration, right? We have to describe and include photocopies and, photographs, that sort of thing. So pictures, I cannot tell you, when you have to judge 2 or 3 projects and you only have so much time to do it, if I can readily at a glance, see, hey, look at these 3 period examples you've provided. Isn't that awesome? Then I'm much more able to compare that to what you've created and say, oh, look, yeah, I see the similarities. 2 + 2 is 4. I get it. Rock on. So pictures, pictures, pictures. I get it. They didn't have a camera in medieval times. Anybody who wants to make the little joke about, well, they didn't have pictures back then, so like, why do we need them now? I'm like, if you want somebody to dry read your paperwork and make sure that they truly absorb and understand everything you've been studying for a year, when they've sat down, even an expert on the topic won't necessarily be informed on the micro aspect of the topic that you're engaging. So you're asking a lot. Make it easy. The judges are not dumb, but they are pressed for time. So the simpler, the more absorbable and accessible you can make it for them, the easier. You don't need to talk down to them. You don't need to, break it down for children. But you also have to be mindful that ideally, when you're done with this and you've made your project worth, 90s or hundreds, or you've worked so hard in your scholastic endeavors to really make a great paperwork that's graded, by multiple different judges at a really high level, and everybody says, yeah, you know your stuff. Ideally, that information is going to live beyond you and go beyond you and go to another person. So the more you can give visual communication, the more people of multiple different, education or at any levels can absorb it, because it should not only be those who are scholastically gifted, and I will put myself not in that category, to be clear, who should understand, a high level, research documentation in the SCA, like people all the way down to, my 11th grade niece, or my 11-year-old niece or whatever, should be able to look at your information and say, if I want to make a period shoe, this is what I should be aspiring to. And I should be able to wrap my brain enough around the information to be able to ideally take a good faith effort, stab at it. So that's what we're really fighting for. Visually compare. All right. So I'm saying that this pattern is period. Why am I saying it's period? Well, because I have this example that came from this mud dive, what have you. And here is my actual tunic. So look side by side. This is what I have created. Now I could lay this out like this exactly, but this is my final project. You can see all the little triangles. And so here is, visual communication that at least it is a good faith effort to create a period product. And so, things that are important is you can speak to why you have chosen, in your inspiration, this. Why did you choose these examples? Well, I'm making a Norse tunic, and here's a Norse dig, and so that's why I made the thing, and I like to dress like that, and it looks pretty, so, but, you also want to find opportunities to highlight sources for the information that you're looking for. Like this came from an actual archaeological dig, right? So here's the information on that, right? Here it was, exhibited in this museum, so scholars across the world have confirmed that this is an authentic art, what have you. And so you want to highlight that, I went to a museum and I saw this pretty picture. I took a picture of it, and that's what I'm making. So, because the museum said it was good enough, and here's 3 other examples. So try to use consistent formatting. Okay, so we talked about you shouldn't have to be at some, egregious, PhD level English writing level to be able to put together paper. But if your formatting is consistent, you will not confuse the judges, right? So if you're, you've got 12 different fonts in there and all the different sizes, and like the headings aren't the same, or they're all over the place, like, there's typography for a reason, right? The bigger the text is, the more important it is. Like, so it should be consistent across the board, ideally as much as you can. You don't have to go crazy with it, but the cleaner it is, the more accessible it is to the reader, who again has limited time to review the information, unless you provide the information in advance, which is completely appropriate. But even so, like, if this stuff is going to go beyond you, dress, right? Make it best that you can. So if you can make it consistent, then that will help the readers absorb the information. Cite every example, right? So if I'm going to put a picture on a page, I need to say where that picture came from and, how it is relevant, right? So this is important because a lot of people will put some pictures in their stuff like, hey, these are examples that I found on the web. Aren't they great? I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's a viable source. I don't know if AI has, helped you with your project and it is not going well. I don't know, anything about these pictures, and more importantly, I don't know, what photographer took picture, and credit where credit's due again. We talked about easy bibs. That's important. And so I do like to highlight a high level purpose of the source's reference. So for instance, in this poem, they mentioned a dragon winning. In the poem, they mentioned the Fae. In my poem, I wrote the dragon beat the Fae, right? So I've given you 2 examples of different poems that reference these 2 different things. They're from the same time period or whatever. So the concept that they would be in the same one, I can't prove unless I actually find one, but I can make a good faith effort saying both of these creatures were in the same culture at the same time, living in the same forest. Is a, I feel like that's enough of an argument to say that I could write both things in my thing. So style and creativity. This is the next section, right? We talked about inspiration and the source. So style and creativity, right? We're going to discuss the characteristics of style for the entry, time, and place, right? And so this is what I love. So you have a picture here, and I'm going to be talking about, men's haircuts for whatever reason, right? So what am I going to do is am I going to show this picture and say, here's an example of men's haircuts? I'm like, no, I'm going to show a highlighted example of this is why I think that they had full cuts. Now, this is a painting and not a picture, et cetera, whatever. But, the more you can communicate, again, visually, the better. And you don't have to do this. Again, this is just something I do. I want to break it down as much as I can. So how can someone identify projects of this type for this particular time place? This is important, right? What elements of this art that you're looking at? For me, it's written works, obviously, but for you, it could be like metalwork or what have you. I had somebody do a jousting armor tool repair thing, and it looked like a little Triskel, but it had different tools on the end. It was very cool. And how do I know this is similar? Well, I'm going to take it, and again, I'm going to put it next to the thing that I created, and either it's going to look exactly like it, or it's going to have enough elements of it for me to argue that it is enough like the 3 different examples that I have, and with my own style and creativity, like I've added another element that was also there, right? So I can't just, create a Nike swoosh and say, oh, that's my creativity. But I could add like chasing dots and say, hey, here's an example of chasing dots or what have you, right? And you want to speak to, how your entry embodies the characteristics, the conclusions you've made, mine is like this because of that. And I make these stylistic, creative choices because not only did I want to make them as an artist, but also there are examples in period where they would have done that. And so again, you can dig into this at your own leisure, but this is the gist, right? So materials and ingredients, right? Here's an example. Again, literally pictures. These are the materials and ingredients. And you'll notice in each section, I have given an image, right? And say, what materials and ingredients am I using? Well, if I was going to do calligraphy and illumination, this is what I would do. These are all of my tools. These are my materials and ingredients, forgive me, right? Used in period. And this is the breakdown, right? These are the materials and ingredients used in period. These are the materials and ingredients I used in my entry. So explain why you chose the materials and the ingredients and how they differ from use in period. I don't want to have lead poisoning, so I didn't use lead paint, but they would have. And here's an example from some source that I found as to a finished product with lead paint. That was an example and my finished project. And so in the end, this is how it would have differed. Using lead paint, maybe it was thicker, right? So the process would have been different than the acrylic paint that you're using now or what have you. And so you want to speak to how that would be different. I had somebody who had a blacksmith project. They created a hammer, right? And that hammer was a sexy hammer. And they spoke to the fact that they did not use wrought iron because it cost $1 million. And so they used, what they had, which is, I believe, steel. And they spoke to the difference in the end product. And, and they showed examples. They literally had an extant example of a wrought iron axe head, which is so awesome. And they said, this is how it would differ. And, or rather, this is mine, and this is why I use that, because I don't have wrought iron. And this is what it would have been in period. But what they didn't do was speak to the difference that working with wrought iron versus steel would be. And so the concept of the creation process was flawed because I can't tell you it was authentic because I'm not using the same material. So what if I can't get my hands on that material? Okay, so then you dig into articles evolving around, how this would have happened. Sometimes they're, other scholars, works and chemical breakdowns. I've seen that before. And sometimes it's some extant concept of, the wrought iron weighed more than steel by so many, sometimes it's like a ship manifest or something like that. So you can get really creative on how you're going to get there, but you have to speak.
And Mistress Ambra, two things. First, a question. Actually, second question. First, only 4 minutes left, unfortunately. And other question that came up was, if you were doing something like a performance, how would you mention those materials? Would it be like you talked about?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about, and again, we're talking about tools, material, I would speak to the piece that you're performing, right? Right. That's your material. Tools, I would speak to what tools of the performer are you using, right? So like, am I using projection? Am I using eye contact? Am I not using eye contact? Am I using hand signals? Is what I'm doing, really cool and fun and you love it? Or is what I'm doing authentic and I don't make eye contact and, what have you? Would I be on the stage alone? Would I be on stage as a woman? These are different tools that I would use, like the tools I might use also, not only as the performer, would be, my clothing, maybe, depending on the time period, I would or would not be in female garb or as a female or what have you. So it could be a myriad of different things, but I would speak to definitely, how I can prove that the way I performed, what I performed was, authentic as much as you can, because again, it's not like we have a lot of recordings from the 14th century. So, but yeah, so I'll leave this to you guys. I've really belabored the point a lot, but on your display, if I can note anything at all, is just, you want to set your display up like it is a museum. Like if you're walking through a museum, like how would they have it? If you were in St. Augustine right now and you went through like a little medieval house, like, how would they have their little setup? So, as much as you can do that, that's great. And then I would suggest certainly having 2 or 3 versions of your research available for the judges, but also if you leave one present, that's good. QR codes are great. But if I can leave you with anything, I'd say don't be intimidated. Don't procrastinate, because doing things last second, you're just going to be sad when you get the information that you could have avoided. You want information you can't get, not information if you had done your homework you can get. So we all do it. Don't beat yourself up if you do. Just, don't revel in the fact in that dark place. Like exercise, you get out of this what you put into it. So, but keep it simple, right? Sensational person. Don't assume knowledge and mind the Marshall Rule number 6, i.e., don't assume they know. Make sure that you've given them the information. But also, don't be rude as a judge or an entrant. Like, take a deep breath. This is a professional environment. We're all trying to work together. And in the end, who cares what they think? Because you're the artist, right? So this is helpful. It is not definitive. Share your work. Seek improvement with sportsmanly conduct and teach others. Share that work. All right. What questions do we have in 1 minute? Sorry, guys. Yay. Thank you all. I can't wait to see your next project. If you guys have questions, feel free to ping me at any time. I really love this. So thank you so much. And thank you again for running this. This is a really great opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And if it's possible, do you have an extra 5 minutes to maybe stay back and answer some questions?
Oh, please. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you so much, Mistress Ambra, for your time and an incredibly informative presentation, truly, and so many resources to share. So thank you so much. I am going to stop recording now.